Hey everyone, we're going over the Blood Death Knight tanking for beginners in this video. If you're new to tanking or haven't played your Blood DK in a while, then Dragonflight is a good time to give it a try. To start, why pick a Blood DK over the other tanking specs in the game? The Blood DK's tanking niche is their ability to heal themselves, sometimes even out-healing the healer. When they take a large chunk of damage in a short period of time, a Blood DK can quickly heal themselves up using Death Strike. On top of that, our mastery, Blood Shield, gives us an absorption shield for a percentage of the amount healed through Death Strike. Some other unique abilities in the Blood Death Knight's toolkit are Death Grip, which is great for pulling casting mobs to you, and their Bolt and Shield mechanic, which is a defensive buff you'll need to maintain. I'll be using a Mythic Plus talent build for this video, and the link to the build is in the description. In my guides, I first like picking out something that I feel is the most important to understand and will have a large impact on your gameplay. For a Blood DK, I'm going with Death and Decay for this. In Dragonflight, using Death and Decay optimally has become more important than in previous expansions. If we open up our talent tree and type in Death and Decay in the search bar, then we see there are 9 talents we are taking that affects Death and Decay. So let's dive into this a bit deeper. In the class tree in the second row, we have Cleaving Strikes that makes our Heart Strike hit up to 3 additional targets while standing in Death and Decay, which greatly improves our AoE damage. Further down in row 6 is Grip of the Dead that reduces enemy movement speed by 90% at first and then decays by 10% per second. This talent is very useful in controlling packs of enemies at the start of a fight in case a party member peels aggro off an enemy. Just below Grip of the Dead is Unholy Ground that gives you 5% haste while standing in Death and Decay, and down from Unholy Ground there's Death's Echo that gives you an extra charge of Death and Decay that gives a huge boost to its uptime. With 2 charges, you should be able to maintain 30 to 40 seconds of uptime without a Crimson Scourge proc. Now over in the Blood talent tree, we'll start in row 3 with Crimson Scourge that gives your auto attacks on targets affected by Blood Plague a chance to make Death and Decay cost no runes and resets its cooldown. When this triggers, you'll see the spell icon for Death and Decay light up on your action bar, and an aura effect will appear that looks like red bubbles. In row 5, there's Relish in Blood, which goes along with the Crimson Scourge talent. When you use a Crimson Scourge proc to Death and Decay, Relish in Blood will heal you for an amount depending on how many bone charges you have, and it will also give you 10 runic power. Just below Relish in Blood is Rapid Decomposition. This talent will cause the damage from Death and Decay to occur 18% more often, and down from there in row 8 is Sanguine Ground. This talent will make you do 6% more damage and receive 5% more healing while standing in Death and Decay. This turns Death and Decay into a small defensive spell with a healing boost. And in row 9 we have Shattering Bone that makes it so whenever a Bone Shield charge is consumed, it will cause AoE damage. The damage is tripled while standing in Death and Decay. So to summarize everything we get from Death and Decay, the offensive benefits include Heart Strike hitting 3 more enemies, 6% more damage, 5% more haste, Death and Decay's damage occurs more often, and improved AoE damage with Bone Shield. The defensive benefits include reduced enemy movement speed, 5% more healing, and a chance for auto attacks to give a free cast that will also heal us. With a better understanding of everything Death and Decay has to offer, let's look at the Blood DK tanking playstyle. I don't like using the term rotation since tanking is very dynamic and you'll need to constantly adapt to whatever situation you find yourself in. Let's use an example of a typical dungeon group pull to understand everything that's going on. If you're on your first pull of an instance or about to engage a raid boss with no charges of Bone Shield, then you can pop Abomination Limb prior to engaging. This will instantly give you 3 charges of Bone Shield, and then another 3 charges every 6 seconds. So letting Abomination Limb run its course for 12 seconds will give you 9 charges of Bone Shield at the start of a fight. After that, you're good to go to begin. To start, I'll pull with our ranged ability, Death's Caress, before I reach the pack. This does 2 things for us. It will apply Blood Plague to the target, but more importantly, it gives us 2 more charges of Bone Shield, which would cap you at 10 stacks if you used Abomination Limb prior to the fight, and you won't be rushed trying to build up stacks with Morrowind. Next, when I get to the group, I'll drop Death and Decay to help control the pack, since your DPS is probably already blasting away at this time. Then I'll hit Blood Boil for more AoE aggro, and to apply Blood Plague to everything. If you have the talent Hemostasis, then Blood Boil will increase the damage and healing for your next Death Strike by 8% per enemy hit and stacks up to 5 times. So if you just pulled a pack of 5 enemies, then 1 Blood Boil will give you the full 40% damage and healing buff. Furthermore, applying Blood Plague to enemies with the talent Coagulopathy will make the enemy take 5% more damage, and Death Strikes will increase the damage of Blood Plague by 30% for 8 seconds, and that stacks up to 5 times. Now that we have Death and Decay down and Blood Plague applied, we want to start building runic power with Heart Strike so we can use Death Strike. If we're lucky, our talent Heart Rend will proc and increase the damage of our next Death Strike by 20%. Once we have the runic power, we'll use Death Strike, which does a few things for us. Besides the damage, you will heal back 25% of all the damage you received in the previous 5 seconds. At a minimum, you'll heal 7% of your maximum health. You'll also benefit from our Blood Shield mastery and get an absorption shield. If you went with the talent Bloodshot, then you'll also deal 25% increased physical damage while your Blood Shield is up. With the talent Voracious, Death Strike will give you 12% leech for 8 seconds, and the talent Ossuary will decrease the runic power cost of Death Strike by 5 if you have at least 5 Bone Shield charges up, which is a nice little incentive to keep your Bone Shield charges high. After this initial round of abilities, you'll move into the dynamic part of tanking. For a Blood Decay, that will consist of maintaining stacks of Bone Shield by using Moral Rend or Death's Caress, ideally standing at 5+ stacks to benefit from Ossuary. Keep up Death and Decay for the wide range of benefits we already covered, and aim for 100% ep time. Maintain Blood Plague on everything so you get Crimson Scourge procs and the damage bonus from Coagulopathy. Death Striking for the healing, Absorb Shield, Leech buff from Voracious, Haste buff from Icy Talons, and to buff Blood Plague damage from Coagulopathy. Keep a Blood Boil charge rolling, especially if you take Hemostasis. You don't want to stay capped on Blood Boil charges. Don't cap on Runic Power, and Death Strike if you are getting close. And if something gets away from you, just Death Grip it back. Since no tanking guide would be complete without talking about defensive cooldowns, let's cover those next. Depending on what talents you take, a Blood Decay has a lot of defensive cooldowns available to them. The first one, and the most iconic cooldown for a Blood Decay, is Vampiric Blood. This will give you 30% increased maximum health and increase all healing and absorbs received by 30% for 10 seconds. Vampiric Blood can be buffed with the talent's Improved Vampiric Blood that gives it 5% more healing and absorbs and makes it last 2 seconds longer. If you go with Red Mist, you can decrease Vampiric Blood's cooldown by 2 seconds for every 10 runic power spent. And the talent Umbilicus Eternus will give you an Absorb Shield after Vampiric Blood expires that will absorb 5 times the damage that Blood Plague dealt during Vampiric Blood's uptime. The popular Mythic Plus build right now either goes with Bloodshot Hemostasis or Umbilicus Eternus. From what I've read during my research, Umbilicus Eternus doesn't appear to be worth it unless you're doing high level keys. There's also an extra step you'd want to do to play Umbilicus Eternus optimally by using a Cancel Aura command so that you gain the 30% absorb buff from Vampiric Blood. Another iconic Blood Decay cooldown is Dancing Rune Weapon that summons a rune weapon for 8 seconds that mirrors your attacks, which adds some unique gameplay outside of the 40% parry chance it gives you. Talents that improve Dancing Rune Weapon are Insatiable Blade that gives you 5 stacks of Bone Shield when you cast Dancing Rune Weapon, and while it's on cooldown, Insatiable Blade will reduce the cooldown by 5 seconds every time a Bone Shield is consumed. The Everlasting Bond talent makes Dancing Rune Weapon summon an additional weapon. So what all does this do for you? While Dancing Rune Weapon is up, casting Blood Boil will make the weapons casted and apply their own Blood Plague to each target. Using Moral Rend will give you 3 additional Bone Shield stacks per weapon for a total of 9 stacks with 1 use of Moral Rend. Heart Strike will also grant an additional 5 runic power for each weapon. While the weapons do cast Death Strike when you do, the healing effect is applied to the weapon and not you. Because of these benefits, Dancing Rune Weapon can be looked at as both a defensive and offensive cooldown. Don't let Vampiric Blood or Dancing Rune Weapon sit off cooldown for very long. We have talents that will shorten their cooldown duration, and not using them makes those talents pointless. Another cooldown we'll grab from our talent tree is Tombstone. What this does is consume 5 charges of Bone Shield, giving you 6 runic power per charge consumed, and gives you an Absorb Shield for 6% of your maximum health. Tombstone has additional benefits because of other talents that we take. For example, Insatiable Blade reduces Dancing Rune Weapon's cooldown by 5 seconds for each Blood Shield consumed. This means Tombstone would immediately reduce the cooldown by 25 seconds, so you would want Dancing Rune Weapon to be on cooldown when you use Tombstone. Additionally, the talent Shattering Bone causes AoE damage whenever a a bone shield charge is consumed. So casting Tombstone while standing in Death and Decay with 5 charges can do a nice bit of burst AoE damage. The way I like to use Tombstone is I pop Dancing Rune weapon and get 5 charges of bone shield. I hit Tombstone to spend those 5 charges and then follow it up with a Marrow Rend to get 9 charges back. An important tip is to use Tombstone with 6+ charges of bone shield. You want at least 1 bone shield charge up at all times. Next up is Icebound Fortitude, which makes you immune to stuns and gives you 30% damage reduction for 8 seconds and has a 3-minute cooldown. If you take the talent Acclamation, that will shave off a minute, so it will turn it into a 2-minute cooldown. Lichborne is another defensive cooldown that will make you immune to Charm, Fear, and Sleep and give you 10% leech for 10 seconds. With the talent Unholy Endurance, Lichborne will also give you a 15% damage reduction and last 2 seconds longer. The last defensive cooldown I'll cover is Anti-Magic Shell. This gives you an absorb shield against magic damage based on a percentage of your health and prevents harmful effects being applied to you. When this shield absorbs magic damage, it will give the added bonus of generating runic power. With the talent Anti-Magic Barrier, Anti-Magic Shell will have a 40-second cooldown and its duration and absorb shield are increased by 40%. Next section I want to cover is stat priorities. Fortunately, blood decays are well balanced when it comes to stats, and they are all pretty much equal. If you have one stat that is really low, then you'd probably get the most benefit from bringing that one up. In no particular order, here's what each stat does for us. Crit will increase your parry chance. Haste will give you increased rune generation speed, reduce your global cooldown, and while you have Bone Shield up, you'll get a multiplicative 10% more haste with the talent Improved Bone Shield. We've already talked about our Mastery Blood Shield and the Absorb Shield that you get when Death Striking. Talents like Gloom Ward and Iron Heart further improve the effects of our Mastery by buffing our Absorbs. You'll also get more attack power from Mastery, so it's not entirely defensive. Versatility reduces the damage you take, but also increases your self-healing, which we do plenty of. So you really can't go wrong with stats on gear. You just might want to pay attention in case one stat is being neglected, or if one stat is a lot higher than the rest. There are cases for stacking one stat more than another depending on the content you're doing. For example, Parry Chance will have more benefit in a Mythic Plus dungeon where you are taking a lot more hits than it would with a raid boss. So if you're doing a lot of Mythic Pluses, you might want more crit. Plus, the 40% Parry Chance from Dancing Rune weapon is additive, so your chance to avoid hits can get really high. Next is Runeforging. For this, just use Rune of the Fallen Crusader. The heal from it is really nice, and the extra strength from it buffs armor and parry chance. I always like to include some useful macros that makes gameplay more fun, so here's a few I use with my DK that will be in the description. This macro will make it so you'll cast Death and Decay at your location without having to manually target it. You can still manually target it if you hold down control. This is a mouse over macro for Death Grip, which can help with casters or runners. This macro casts your other cooldowns and are all nicely synced with a 2-minute timer. With this meant to be a beginner's guide, I don't want to get deeper into things at risk of overwhelming somebody wanting to start tanking on their blood decay. So if you have decent gear but are nervous to give tanking a try, I recommend practicing in a normal mode dungeon, which are soloable by tanking classes at this point in Dragonflight. Pull some packs and get used to your skills. You can also learn dungeon routes this way, since you'll be looked at as the de facto group leader most of the time as a tank. Personally, I see a Blood Decay as one of the more complex tanks to play optimally. You have 2 resources you need to manage, and to get the most out of abilities, cooldowns, and talents, it requires a bit more concentration than other tanks. But don't let that dissuade you from giving Blood Decay a try. They can be a lot of fun, and are one of the coolest character themes in the game in my opinion. I hope you found this guide helpful, and if you did, then consider liking and subscribing for more World of Warcraft content. Until next time, take care.